There's a people nestled in the mountains between France and Spain who bleed differently than the rest of humanity. The Basques carry the strangest blood on Earth, with Rh-negative frequencies that defy every law of genetics and evolution. 30 to 35% of Basques are Rh-negative. Compare that to 15% across Europe and barely 1 to 2% worldwide. These numbers aren't just unusual, they're impossible according to standard population genetics. But here's what makes it truly disturbing. Every empire that tried to conquer the Basques failed to change them. Romans, Visigoths, Moors, Franks, all left genetic traces in neighboring populations, but the Basques remain genetically frozen in time. They speak Euskera, Europe's last pre-Indo-European language, a linguistic fossil that predates Latin, Germanic, and Celtic tongues by thousands of years. Their blood, their genes, their language, and their culture all point to the same impossible conclusion. They're Europe's last unchanged people. Why do they bleed differently when every empire failed to change them? The answer involves Ice Age survival, possible encounters with extinct human species, and genetic preservation so perfect it suggests something beyond natural selection. Today we're uncovering the mystery hidden in Basque blood, a mystery that challenges everything we think we know about European genetics, human evolution, and the true diversity of our species. Because the Basques don't just carry unusual blood, they carry genetic memories from before history began. How did a small mountain people manage to preserve genetic signatures that the rest of Europe lost thousands of years ago? The Pyrennees Mountains didn't just protect the Basques from armies, they created a genetic fortress that preserved bloodlines everyone else had forgotten. This rugged barrier between France and Spain became one of the most important genetic refuge zones in human history. Dr. Doron Behar's comprehensive genetic study, published in Pylos Genetics, revealed that the Basques represent a genetic island in Europe. While surrounding populations show complex mixtures of ancestry from multiple migration waves, Basque genetics remain remarkably uniform and ancient. Martin Richards' research in Nature demonstrated that Basque genetic lineages trace back continuously to Paleolithic populations, the hunter-gatherers who first colonized Europe over 40,000 years ago. Most European populations show genetic disruptions from agricultural migrations, steppe invasions, and historical conquests. The Basques show none of these patterns. The mountains created more than physical isolation. They generated cultural and linguistic barriers that reinforced genetic separation. Marriage patterns, trade networks, and social structures all developed to maintain community boundaries that inadvertently preserved ancient bloodlines. Arthur Ernest Morant's foundational research documented how this geographic isolation created the world's highest concentration of Rh-negative blood. But the Pyrenees protected more than just unusual blood types. They preserved genetic variants that provide crucial insights into Europe's deep past. The Basque genetic profile represents what most Europeans looked like before the great population replacements that reshaped the continent. They're living representatives of Europe's original inhabitants, carrying genetic signatures from human populations that existed before agriculture, before metalworking, before recorded history. But how did these ancient bloodlines survive not just geographic isolation, but also the most devastating environmental catastrophe in human memory? What if the Basques are the direct descendants of the only European populations to survive the last glacial maximum in place? 20,000 years ago, Europe was a frozen wasteland. Ice sheets covered most of the continent, pushing human populations into small refuge zones in southern Spain, Italy, and the Balkans. Most of Europe's original inhabitants either died or fled south, creating massive genetic bottlenecks that reshaped the continent's population. But one refuge zone stands out: the Franco-Cantabrian region that includes modern Basque territory. Pedro Sora's research in current biology revealed that this area served as a genetic reservoir where Ice Age populations survived and maintained their ancient bloodlines. Lawrence Strauss's archaeological studies documented continuous human habitation in Basque regions throughout the last glacial maximum. While most of Europe was uninhabitable, Basque ancestors endured in mountain valleys, caves, and coastal areas that remained ice-free. This survival came at a genetic cost. Small populations, living in isolation, developed the founder effects and genetic drift that created the unusual blood type frequencies we see today. H-negative blood, rare everywhere else, became common in these Ice Age refuge populations. But survival in the Franco-Cantabrian refuge required more than geographic luck. These populations developed sophisticated hunting technologies, social organization, and environmental knowledge that allowed them to thrive in conditions that killed off neighboring groups. The famous cave paintings of Altamira and Lascaux were created by these Ice Age survivors, the same populations whose genetic descendants became the modern Basques. Their art, their technology, and their blood all represent continuous inheritance from Europe's Paleolithic past. When the ice retreated and new populations began recolonizing Europe, the Basque ancestors had already established territorial claims, cultural systems, and genetic adaptations that made them remarkably resistant to displacement or genetic mixing. But their survival through the Ice Age might not have been their only encounter with extinction-level challenges. Recent archaeological discoveries suggest they may have inherited their unusual genetics from even more ancient sources. Could Rh-negative blood trace back to genetic encounters between modern humans and archaic species that officially never happened? The Lazetiki cave in Basque territory tells a disturbing story. Neanderthals lived there for over 150,000 years, developing sophisticated tool technologies and social systems. Then, around 41,000 years ago, early modern humans arrived in the same region. Recent genetic research published in Science revealed that modern Europeans carry 2 to 4% Neanderthal DNA, but Basque populations show unusual patterns of archaic admixture that don't match standard models of human Neanderthal interbreeding. David Reich's analysis in Who We Are and How We Got Here suggests that Basque genetics include contributions from ghost populations, archaic human groups that left genetic traces but minimal archaeological evidence. These unknown contributors may have included late surviving Neanderthal populations or other archaic species. The timing is crucial. Basque territory represents one of the last places in Europe where Neanderthals and modern humans coexisted. If genetic mixing occurred anywhere, it would have been in these mountainous refuges where both species survived longer than anywhere else in Europe. But here's where the genetics become truly mysterious. Rh-negative shows characteristics that suggest very ancient origins, possibly predating the separation between modern humans and Neanderthals. The protein systems affected by Rh status influence immune function, blood chemistry, and even neural development. Green and colleagues' analysis of the Neanderthal genome revealed that archaic humans possessed different blood chemistry than modern populations. Could Rh-negative blood represent a surviving remnant of these extinct bloodlines? The Basques show the highest frequencies of other archaic genetic markers as well: mitochondrial haplogroups, Y chromosome variants, and autosomal DNA sequences that appear nowhere else in Europe at similar concentrations. If Rh-negative blood does trace back to archaic human admixture, it would explain why it appears to violate normal population genetic patterns. It's not a recent mutation, it's an ancient inheritance from human species that no longer exist as distinct populations. But the preservation of these archaic genetic elements required more than just geographic isolation. It required cultural and social systems that actively maintained genetic distinctiveness over thousands of years. How did the Basques resist genetic change when every major population movement in European history failed to affect them? The Indo-European migrations that began around 2500 BCE fundamentally reshaped European genetics, languages, and cultures. These nomadic peoples from the steppes introduced new technologies, social systems, and genetic lineages that mixed extensively with existing populations throughout the continent. But not in Basque territory. Inigo Olalde's groundbreaking research published in Science traced the genomic history of the Iberian Peninsula over 8,000 years. While neighboring populations show clear genetic contributions from Indo-European migrants, Celtic peoples, Romans, Visigoths, and Moorish populations, the Basques remained genetically isolated. This resistance to genetic change becomes even more remarkable when you consider the military pressure these populations faced. Romans spent decades trying to subdue Basque tribes. Visigoths established kingdoms throughout Iberia. Moorish armies conquered most of Spain and maintained control for centuries. Yet none of these conquests left significant genetic traces in Basque populations. Luis Botiguer's research in PNAS demonstrated that North African genetic influences, clearly visible in southern Spanish populations, barely penetrate Basque genetic profiles. The Romans called them Vascones and considered them unconquerable. Medieval chronicles described them as people who bend but never break. Modern genetics reveals why their social organization, marriage customs, and territorial control created barriers to genetic mixing that persisted across millennia. Rodriguez Espeleta and colleagues' research in Hematologica specifically documented how Rh-negative frequencies remain stable in Basque populations, despite centuries of contact with neighboring groups. The genetic preservation was so complete, it seems almost intentional. But this genetic resistance wasn't just about military conquest. The Basques maintained cultural and linguistic barriers that reinforced genetic separation in ways that pure geographic isolation couldn't accomplish. Their language became the key to understanding how they achieved genetic preservation that defies normal population dynamics. What if Euskera isn't just Europe's oldest language, but the genetic firewall that preserved the world's strangest blood? Euskera, the Basque language, represents one of the most important linguistic mysteries in human history. It's Europe's last pre-Indo-European language, a linguistic fossil that survived when Latin, Germanic, Celtic, and Slavic tongues replaced every other European language family. But Euskera did more than preserve ancient words. It preserved ancient bloodlines. Torsten Günther's research, published in Current Biology, revealed direct correlations between linguistic boundaries and genetic clusters in Basque populations. Communities that spoke only Euskera showed the highest Rh-negative frequencies, while bilingual areas showed diluted genetic signatures. R.L. Trask's historical linguistics research demonstrated that Euskera created social barriers that functioned like genetic firewalls. Marriage patterns, trade relationships, and cultural exchange all followed linguistic lines that inadvertently preserved ancient genetic variants. The language wasn't just a communication tool, it was an identity marker that determined who belonged to the community and who remained an outsider. These social boundaries created reproductive isolation that maintained genetic distinctiveness across thousands of years. Ancient Basque legal codes, written in Euskera, specifically addressed marriage customs, inheritance patterns, and community membership in ways that reinforced genetic boundaries. The language carried cultural instructions for preserving bloodlines that modern geneticists are only beginning to understand. But the relationship between language and genetics goes deeper than social organization. Recent research suggests that certain genetic variants, including those associated with Rh-negative blood, may influence brain development and neural function in ways that affect language processing and cultural transmission. The preservation of Euskera required specific cognitive and cultural adaptations that may have been linked to the same genetic variants that created unusual blood chemistry. Language and blood type weren't just preserved together, they may have been functionally connected. This genetic-linguistic connection explains why attempts to suppress Euskera throughout history met with such fierce resistance. Attacking the language threatened not just cultural identity, but the biological distinctiveness that defined Basque ethnicity. But the preservation of ancient language and blood created more than just genetic isolation. It preserved cultural memories and mythological traditions that may contain clues about the true origins of Rh-negative blood. Why do Basque legends consistently describe their ancestors as different from ordinary humans in ways that mirror their genetic distinctiveness? Basque mythology is filled with beings whose blood and nature differed from normal humans. Mari, the mountain goddess, possessed supernatural powers and could transform between human and animal forms. Sugar, the storm serpent, brought lightning and thunder while maintaining human appearance. The Gentilak were giants who built megalithic structures before disappearing into legend. José Miguel de Barandiaran's comprehensive collection of Basque folklore revealed consistent patterns. Supernatural beings who looked human but possessed different blood, different powers, and different relationships with the natural world. Sandra Ott's anthropological research documented how these mythological traditions correlated with actual genetic and cultural patterns. Communities with the highest Rh-negative frequencies maintained the most elaborate stories about otherworldly ancestors and supernatural bloodlines. But the most intriguing legends concern the Sorjanak, Basque witches who were believed to possess blood that could heal or curse. Medieval European witch trials specifically noted that accused Sorjanak often had unusual physical characteristics, including eye colors and blood properties that differed from normal populations. These weren't random superstitions. They were cultural attempts to explain observable differences in physiology, behavior, and even cognitive patterns that correlated with genetic distinctiveness. Ancient Roman and medieval chronicles consistently described the Basques as possessing unusual physical and mental characteristics. They were noted for exceptional endurance, resistance to certain diseases, and cognitive patterns that differed from neighboring populations. Modern medical research has confirmed that Rh-negative blood is associated with measurable differences in immune function, stress response, and even neural development. The mythological traditions may have been preserving accurate observations about the biological effects of unusual genetic variants. The persistence of these legends across centuries suggests they served important cultural functions, helping communities understand and preserve genetic distinctiveness that provided survival advantages, but also created social isolation. But the myths also hint at something more disturbing: the possibility that Basque genetic distinctiveness represents survival of human variants that were systematically eliminated from other European populations. What if the Basques' most distinctive feature, what they lack, reveals the true secret of their genetic preservation? Modern genetic analysis reveals that Basques are defined not by what they possess, but by what they're missing. They lack the steppe ancestry that characterizes most Europeans. They lack the Moorish genetic contributions found throughout Iberia. They lack the Roman-era genetic mixing visible in neighboring populations. Inigo Olalde's comprehensive genomic analysis, published in Science, documented this pattern of systematic absence. While surrounding populations show complex genetic mixtures from multiple historical sources, Basque genetics remain remarkably pure, meaning unchanged from their Paleolithic ancestors. This genetic purity extends to their blood chemistry. Rh-negative blood is defined by the absence of the Rh protein on red blood cells. The Basques' most distinctive trait is something they lack, not something they possess. Luigi Cavalli Sforza's landmark research in the history and geography of human genes revealed that this pattern of absence creates a genetic negative space that preserves ancient European genetic variants that vanished everywhere else. The correlation isn't accidental. Populations that successfully resisted genetic admixture also preserved the biological variants that defined Europe's original inhabitants. The Basques represent what Europeans looked like before the great population replacements that reshaped the continent. But this genetic preservation came at a cost. Small, isolated populations are vulnerable to genetic drift, inbreeding, and the accumulation of rare genetic variants that can be either advantageous or harmful. The high frequency of Rh-negative blood in Basque populations may represent the best preserved example of genetic drift in human populations, a rare variant that became common through founder effects and reproductive isolation. Yet the pattern of absence suggests something more systematic than random genetic drift. The Basques seem to have actively avoided genetic mixing in ways that preserved not just blood types, but entire genetic profiles from Europe's deep past. This systematic genetic preservation raises disturbing questions about whether other European populations lost ancient genetic variants through conquest, displacement, or more deliberate genetic replacement. What if Rh-negative blood represents genetic evidence of human encounters that mainstream archaeology refuses to acknowledge? The geographic distribution and genetic characteristics of Rh-negative blood have inspired theories that venture far beyond conventional population genetics. Some researchers privately speculate about ghost populations, archaic human groups that contributed genetic material but left minimal archaeological evidence. David Rice's research revealed that modern European genetics include contributions from at least 3 distinct ancestral populations, including mysterious groups that appear in genetic analyses but can't be definitively identified from archaeological remains. The Basques' unusual genetic profile, including their extreme Rh-negative frequencies, fits the pattern expected from survival of these ghost populations. Their mountain refuge zones could have preserved genetic lineages that were eliminated elsewhere through conquest or environmental pressures. Joseph Lazaridis and colleagues' analysis of ancient European genomes suggests that the genetic ancestors of modern Basques may have included populations that possess genetic variants no longer found in other European groups. More controversial theories propose that Rh-negative blood traces back to pre-sapiens hominin groups, Neanderthals, Denisovans, or other archaic species that contributed genetic material before disappearing as distinct populations. The complex biochemistry of Rh-negative blood, involving multiple genetic pathways and protein systems, suggests ancient origins that predate the emergence of modern human populations. If this blood type evolved in archaic species, it could explain why it appears to violate normal population genetic patterns. Fringe theories venture even further, suggesting connections to lost civilizations, deliberate genetic preservation by advanced ancient cultures, or even non-terrestrial genetic contributions. While these theories lack scientific support, they reflect genuine puzzles about Rh-negative blood's origins and distribution. The most systematic theory proposes that ancient European populations deliberately preserved rare genetic lineages for religious, political, or practical reasons. The Basques' cultural traditions suggest sophisticated understanding of inheritance and bloodline maintenance that wouldn't be officially discovered until modern genetics, whether through natural selection, cultural preservation, or more exotic mechanisms. The Basques maintain genetic variants that provide unique insights into human evolutionary history. But regardless of their ultimate origins, the Basques represent something unprecedented in human genetics, a population that successfully preserved ancient genetic variants against overwhelming pressure for change. What if the Basques' unusual blood makes them more than just a genetic curiosity, but a biological time capsule, essential for understanding human diversity? Today, 30 to 35% of Basques carry Rh-negative blood, making them the world's most genetically distinctive population. This isn't just medical trivia, it's a genetic treasure trove that provides crucial insights into European evolutionary history. Rodriguez Espeleta and colleagues' recent research documented how Basque genetic diversity remains remarkably preserved despite centuries of modernization and global contact. Their genetic profiles continue to reflect ancient European variants found nowhere else at similar frequencies. In modern transfusion medicine, Basque donors are particularly valuable because of their rare blood types and genetic variants that can save lives in specific medical situations. Willy Fliegel's research on Rh genetics emphasizes the clinical importance of preserving genetic diversity in donor populations. But the Basques represent more than medical utility. They're a living laboratory for understanding how human populations maintain genetic distinctiveness across thousands of years of environmental and social pressure. Their genetic preservation demonstrates that human populations can actively resist genetic homogenization through cultural practices, social organization, and geographical positioning. The Basques proved that small populations can maintain biological distinctiveness even when surrounded by larger, more powerful groups. The implications extend beyond European genetics. Indigenous populations worldwide face similar pressures for genetic and cultural assimilation. The Basque example provides hope that distinctive genetic lineages can survive modernization and globalization. Modern Basque communities continue to show elevated rates of genetic variance associated with specific cognitive patterns, disease resistances, and physiological characteristics. These traits may represent adaptive advantages that were lost in other European populations through genetic mixing. As global population genetics becomes increasingly homogenized through travel and intermarriage, populations like the Basques become more valuable as repositories of human genetic diversity. Their blood isn't just unusual, it's irreplaceable. Every Basque genetic lineage that disappears takes with it genetic information about European evolutionary history that can never be recovered. Is their blood just an accident of survival, the result of geographic isolation and cultural persistence? Or are they the last echo of a forgotten people, carrying genetic memories from before recorded history began? The answer may be less important than the preservation itself. The Basques represent proof that human genetic diversity can survive against impossible odds, maintaining ancient bloodlines that carry the survival wisdom of our deepest ancestors. But there's more to discover. If this opened your eyes to the genetic mysteries hidden in human populations, subscribe now. Tell me in the comments, do you have Rh-negative blood? Have you traced your ancestry to populations with unusual genetic characteristics? Share your genetic testing results and family histories. Share this video. The more people understand genetic diversity, the better chance we have of preserving the biological treasures that small populations like the Basques represent. The truth is flowing through bloodlines that have survived for thousands of years. The choice to preserve that truth is ours. Thanks for watching.